The mountains held their silence like a secret, broken only by the thin, desperate cry of a child. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel and tap the bell icon. Stories like this deserve to be remembered. Snow pressed heavy on the Yoa. Pines, their dark needles sagging under white weight. In the shadow of those trees, Elena Navarro stumbled, her skirts torn, her shawl stiff with frost. Her arms cradled a swaddled infant whose wails cut through the frozen air, sharp, raw, unrelenting. The child's lips were pale, searching for milk she no longer had to give. Elena's body, worn down by hunger and flight, trembled as if every step were a defiance of death itself. She pressed her cheek against the baby's damp forehead and whispered in a broken voice, "Quiet now, mi corazón. Quiet." But the baby would not be soothed. Elena's face was striking even under the grime and exhaustion. Her skin caught between her Mexican father's copper warmth and her Apache mother's sharper, darker beauty. Her hair, once thick and black, now clung in frozen strands to her cheeks. Her eyes carried the smoke of too many burned camps, too many nights listening to screams on the wind. She had been walking for 2 days since leaving the smoldering ruins of the camp near the river. Soldiers had come at dawn, cavalry blue catching the morning light like the glint of knives. They rode in with rifles, calling her people thieves, savages, mongrels. By the time they left, her kin were scattered, some dead, some fled. She carried what mattered most. Her baby, wrapped in a thin blanket, pressed against her breast like a final prayer. The child's cries weakened, slipping into the hollow sound of hunger. Elena fell to her knees in the snow, clutching him close. Her breath plumed in the air, ragged, desperate. She prayed to the mountain itself, to the spirit of her mother, to any power that had not abandoned her, and then, footsteps. Not the heavy gallop of cavalry hooves, nor the cruel laughter of bounty men, but the crunch of boots across snow, measured and solitary. Jonas Hale. He moved with the careful grace of someone long accustomed to silence. A broad-shouldered rancher in a weathered duster, his beard flecked with frost, eyes shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He had ridden up the slope searching for stray cattle driven off by wolves, but what he found stopped him cold. A woman on her knees, clutching a child like a shield against the world. For a long moment, he stood still, rifle slung across his back, unsure if what he saw was flesh or ghost. The war had left him with too many ghosts. "Ma'am?" His voice was rough from disuse. "You lost?" Elena turned her face toward him, eyes fierce despite her weakness. She pulled the baby tighter against her chest, as if even a stranger's glance could steal him away. "Stay back," she rasped, her accent cutting the English. Jonas lifted both hands slowly, palms open. He had seen that look before, a cornered soul, brittle and dangerous. He didn't move closer, but the sight of the infant's tiny fist poking from the blanket, blue with cold, pierced him deeper than any bullet could. "That little one won't make it through another night in this cold," he said softly. Neither will you." Elena's eyes darted to the trees, searching for escape. She had trusted men before, and trust had left her with scars. But her body betrayed her. She swayed, too weak to rise, her knees buckling in the snow. Jonas crossed the space in 3 long strides. Before she could fight him, he shrugged off his heavy sheepskin coat and wrapped it around both mother and child. The warmth enfolded them like a cocoon, the weight pressing comfort against their shivering frames. Elena gasped, torn between fear and relief. Her son whimpered, then quieted, nuzzling deeper into the coat. Jonas knelt beside her, his eyes steady, but distant, as if speaking more to his own conscience than to her. "I've left folks behind before. I won't do it again." Elena studied him, suspicion still sharp in her gaze. He smelled of leather and smoke, not of whiskey or blood. His hands were calloused, but they trembled faintly, betraying something wounded within. At last, with a strength born only of love, she whispered, "Help him. Not me. Help him." Jonas met her eyes, and for the first time in years he felt Something shifted inside his chest, the echo of duty, the ache of redemption. He slid his arms beneath them both, lifting mother and child as if they weighed nothing. The snow groaned under his boots as he began the long walk back toward the cabin hidden in the folds of the mountains. Above them, the sky darkened, clouds, rolling heavy with more snow to come. Behind them, the forest closed in again, swallowing their tracks as if the mountain itself had chosen to keep this fragile secret safe. The wind came down from the peaks like a living thing, biting at skin and rattling through the pines. Jonas shifted Elena and the baby in his arms, the weight both grounding and relentless. His coat wrapped around them, but already the snow was creeping in through the seams, stinging his own flesh. The child whimpered softly, small fists clutching at nothing. Elena pressed her face into the collar of the coat, her body rigid against him. Every jolt of his stride made her tense, as though expecting at any moment to be dropped, betrayed, or delivered to enemies. "Put me down," she whispered, her breath warm against his chest. "I can walk." Jonas didn't slow. "You'll fall, and that little one doesn't have time for pride." Her head jerked up, dark eyes flashing. "You think I've only got pride left? I've carried him through fire and blood. Don't tell me what I can endure." Jonas swallowed hard but said nothing. He respected fire. It had once burned through him too. But he'd also seen pride dig graves. The trail wound upward through drifts that swallowed his boots to the ankle. Jonas's cabin lay a mile ahead, a weather-beaten shelter he had built after leaving the war. In his mind he pictured it. The rough-hewn beams, the stone hearth, the faint smell of pine smoke clinging to the rafters. A place meant only for one man's silence. Never for this woman, never for a child. As he trudged on, a flash of memory tore through him. Tennessee, 1864, a farmhouse burning in the distance, women crying for help, and his company ordered to march on. He had obeyed. He had left them. Their screams haunted him still. The child stirred, dragging him back to the present. Jonas adjusted his grip, cradling the tiny body as gently as if it were glass. "Does he have a name?" he asked quietly. Elena hesitated before answering. "Mateo." Jonas let the name settle on his tongue. Strong name. Her gaze searched, his face as if weighing whether he mocked her. But his eyes were steady, voice plain. She looked away, muttering something in Apache under her breath. A prayer, perhaps, or a warning. They reached a ridge where the snow lay thinner, and Jonas set her down just long enough to catch his breath. He unwrapped a small bundle from his pack, dried venison, hard as stone, and a flask of water. "Here." He broke off a piece, offering it. Elena's lips pressed tight. "Why would you share with me? Your kind took everything from mine." Jonas didn't flinch at the sting. He'd heard worse, and worse still he'd deserved. "Because if you starve, that baby starves. And I reckon neither of us wants that on our conscience." Her hunger betrayed her resolve. She took the meat, chewing slowly, eyes locked on him the whole time as though it might yet turn to ash in her mouth. She dribbled a little water onto her fingertip and touched it to Mateo's lips, watching with aching tenderness as the child sucked greedily at the drops. Jonas turned his face away, letting the sight pierce him in silence. He remembered another child once, a boy barely 5, standing on a dirt road as Union soldiers passed. The boy had held a doll made of rags and watched Jonas with hollow eyes. Jonas had given him nothing. He had kept marching. Snow began to fall, again fat flakes drifting in the gray light. Jonas lifted Elena once more, her protest weaker this time. She leaned against him, exhaustion finally overcoming suspicion. The last stretch of trail was steep, winding between jagged rocks where mountain goats sometimes perched. Jonas's breath came harsh, clouds of steam against the fading daylight. The cabin appeared at last through the trees, squat, sturdy, smoke curling faintly from the chimney he had stoked that morning. He pushed the door open with his shoulder, carrying them inside. Warmth greeted them, the fire still alive in the hearth. The small single-room space smelled of wood smoke, leather, and pine resin. Tools lined one wall, a rifle leaned in the corner, and a Bible lay worn on the table. Jonas lowered Elena onto the bunk, pulling his coat tighter around her and Mateo. The woman's eyes darted about the cabin, reading every detail, every exit. She was still not safe, not in her mind, not anywhere. "You can rest here tonight," Jonas said, his voice low. "I'll keep the fire going. In the morning, if you want to go, I won't stop you." Elena's lips curved in something that was not a smile. "You think one night erases everything? Men have promised me shelter before. They promised safety, then took what they wanted." Jonas froze, then met her eyes with the weight of a man who had nothing left to barter but truth. "I want nothing. From you." The silence stretched between them, sharp as the wind outside. Mateo whimpered, and Elena rocked him, humming softly in Apache. The melody, fragile and haunting, filled the cabin with something Jonas had not felt in years. Not silence, not emptiness, but life. He sat near the fire, staring into the flames, his mind pulled between past and present. He had carried her, because of the child. That was what he told himself. But deep down, he knew it was more. It was redemption clawing at him, demanding another chance. Outside, the storm rose, snow sweeping across the mountains. But inside the cabin, 3 lives now shared the same fragile warmth. Jonas reached for a log, feeding the fire, and murmured almost to himself, "You'll be safe here, for as long as I can make it so." Elena's eyes softened only for a moment before hardening again. She held Mateo closer and whispered fiercely, "I'll believe that when the mountains stop burying our dead." The flames crackled, the storm howled, and between them stretched a silence filled with both mistrust and possibility. The cabin walls creaked under the weight of the storm, as if the mountains themselves pressed closer to listen. The fire painted the room in amber, flickering over rough-hewn timbers, and the small figure of Mateo, sleeping in a makeshift cradle Jonas had fashioned from an old wooden box. Elena sat nearby, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, hands busy mending a torn sleeve with thread pulled from unraveled cloth. Jonas watched her from the table, where his calloused fingers rested on a worn Bible. He had not read aloud in years, but something in the silence of the room pushed words back into his throat. "You always staring?" Elena asked without looking up, her tone sharp but not without warmth. Jonas shifted in his chair. "Just watching you work. You've a steady hand." Her lips pressed thin, but her eyes softened briefly before she bent back over the cloth. She had the air of someone who could not afford to waste gentleness. The storm kept them bound to the cabin for 3 days. During daylight hours, Elena proved herself far from helpless. She rose early to help Jonas milk the 2 goats he kept. Her movements clumsy at first, then sure. She mended cracks in the window shutters with strips of cloth, swept the floor with branches bound into a broom, and boiled herbs she had kept hidden in a small pouch tied at her waist. "For fever," she explained when Jonas asked, holding up a sprig of dried yarrow. "For cuts and burns, my mother taught me." Jonas took it carefully as if the plant itself carried her memory. "I could have used this once." He didn't explain further, but Elena saw the shadow pass over his face, the same shadow she saw when the fire caught his eyes just right. At night, when Mateo whimpered, Jonas rose too, pacing the floorboards with the baby in his arms while Elena took a few minutes to sleep. The sight startled her the first time. A rancher with scars on his knuckles and a rifle at his door, rocking a hungry child like he was the most fragile thing on earth. "You don't have to," she muttered, one night, voice rough with exhaustion. Jonas only shook his head. "Don't mean I shouldn't." For all their small moments of peace, the air between them carried tension like a bowstring pulled tight. One evening, as Jonas split logs outside, Elena stepped into the snow to gather water from a barrel. She looked across the white slopes, where smoke from distant cabins curled faintly in the valley below. Her jaw tightened. "Your people look down on mine," she said suddenly, not turning toward him. "They call us thieves, savages, half-breeds. But what are settlers who burn homes and take land if not thieves themselves?" Jonas lowered the axe slowly, his breath clouding in the cold. Not all men think like that. Her gaze cut back, to him sharp as flint. But enough do. Enough to leave me running through the snow with only this child. He met her anger with quiet gravity. And enough of us carry guilt we can't lay down. Elena's fire dimmed a little at that. She said no more. But later, as Jonas tended the goats, he found the water bucket full by the door. She had brought it in for him, wordless. It was Matteo who softened the air between them. One afternoon, the child laughed for the first time, a small, breathy giggle as Jonas pulled faces by the fire. Elena froze at the sound, her sewing needle slipping from her hand. She hadn't heard laughter from him since before the raid. Tears sprang unbidden to her eyes. Jonas glanced up, startled by her silence. For a long heartbeat, they looked at each other across the room. Elena's lips trembled into the faintest smile, and Jonas's chest ached with something he had long forgotten. Hope. Another night, Jonas opened the Bible and began to read aloud, his deep voice carrying verses through the cabin. He had meant it for himself, but Elena listened, rocking Matteo as the words washed over her. She closed her eyes, not in prayer, but in surrender to the rhythm, as if the sound alone built a fragile wall against the world outside. "You believe in it still?" she asked softly when he stopped. Jonas stared at the open pages. "I believe, in trying, even when I fall short." Her eyes lingered on him, dark and unreadable. "Then maybe you're different from the rest." But even in warmth, shadows grew. At night, when she thought Jonas asleep, Elena would sit by the window staring toward the valley. Her hand always drifted to the knife she kept hidden beneath the bed. Her shoulders were tense, her ears attuned to sounds beyond the storm. Jonas noticed, though he said nothing. He had seen the hunted look before in soldiers who carried secrets they dared not share. When he finally asked, she shook her head. "Sleep, rancher. You don't want the truth." But he did, because every moment, with her, every smile Matteo gave pulled him further from silence and deeper into danger. On the third night, the storm broke. The sky cleared to reveal a silver moon casting the snowfields in ghostly light. Jonas stepped outside, the cold sharp against his skin, and saw Elena standing there barefoot, her hair shining with frost, Matteo tucked against her shoulder. The mountains stretched vast and endless behind her, a world of beauty and peril both. She whispered something to the child in Apache, words Jonas didn't understand but felt like a vow. He watched her long, steady, a question burning on his tongue but unspoken. For the first time, he realized his cabin was no longer only his. The wind carried the scent of pine and smoke, and with it the weight of choices yet to come. The mining town lay heavy under dust and suspicion. Wagons groaned down the main street, boots struck wood porches, and the clang of a blacksmith's hammer carried through the bitter air. But it was not the sound that unsettled Jonas. It was the whispers. He had come for flour, salt, and rifle rounds. Instead, he found a trader leaning across the counter, voice lowered as if sharing poison. "They're hunting a woman," the man said, eyes darting. "Half-breed with a babe. Word is she slit a soldier's throat down south. Bounty hunters rode in yesterday drinking hard, saying they'll track her across the mountains if need be." Jonas's hand froze on the sack of flour. His heartbeat thudded like hoofbeats on hard ground. He asked nothing more, but as he mounted his horse and turned toward the long road home, his thoughts tangled like brambles. Elena. Snow fell in soft spirals when Jonas reached the cabin. Smoke rose from the chimney, warm and ordinary, yet his chest felt tight with dread. He stepped inside, stomping snow from his boots. Elena looked up from feeding Matteo with a wooden spoon. The child reached for her hair, tugging, gurgling. It should have been a scene of peace. But Jonas's eyes were hard. "We need to talk," he said. Her hands stilled. The air grew brittle, like thin ice ready to crack. "About what?" "In town, men are asking about a woman with a child." He hesitated, then let the words fall heavy. "They say she killed a soldier." For a long moment, Elena did not breathe. Her dark eyes flashed, then dimmed, as though some fragile mask had shattered. She set the bowl aside, lifted her chin. So now you know. Jonas's voice was low, ragged with betrayal. Tell me it isn't you. Elena held his gaze. What would you rather hear? A lie to ease your conscience? The fire snapped between them, throwing shadows across her face. She drew in a trembling breath. He came into our camp, she began, voice raw. A soldier with whiskey on his breath after the raid. My husband was already gone, my people. Her voice broke, then steadied with iron. He tried to take me, tried to take more. I found a knife before he could. When he fell, the others called me murderer, said I'd spilled government blood. They branded me outlaw, not victim. Her hands clenched, nails digging into her palms. So I ran. I carried my son and I ran until the snow burned my feet. Jonas closed his eyes. He could see it too clearly. The desperation, the violence, the judgment of men who chose order over justice. His jaw worked as memory clawed at him. The screams of women in war-torn villages, his own orders to turn away, to leave them behind. When his eyes opened, they blazed with torment. Do you know what this means? If they find you here, they'll burn this place. Kill us both and the child too. Elena stepped closer, firelight glinting on her cheekbones. Then turn me in. Tie my hands. Drag me to them like they want. Would that ease your burden, rancher? The words cut deep. Jonas flinched, his silence heavier than steel chains. Her voice rose, fierce and trembling. You speak of guilt in your past, men you left to die, children you could not save, and now you stand again with a choice. Do you want a woman's blood on your hands again? The accusation struck like a hammer. Jonas's throat tightened. He saw not Elena alone, but every ghost he carried, every silent scream buried in memory. For a heartbeat, the room burned with something beyond anger. The raw pull of survival, fear, and unspoken need. Jonas's hand lifted not to strike, but to cup the air between them as if trying to bridge the impossible gap. Elena. His voice cracked. You think I could hand you over? After all this? After watching you fight to keep that boy alive? Her eyes shone, wet with unshed tears, though her stance stayed rigid. Then know what you choose. You choose to carry my curse too. Jonas's chest heaved. He wanted to touch her, to anchor her in something beyond pain, but his hands curled into fists at his sides. The space between them trembled with words unsaid. With longing shackled by fear, silence swallowed the cabin until only Mateo's soft breathing remained. Jonas turned to the window, staring out at the mountains, their ridges sharp against the crimson dusk. Then let them come, he muttered at last, his voice low but resolute. I've run from guilt long enough. If I fall, I'll fall standing beside you. Behind him, Elena exhaled as though she had been holding her breath for days. She lowered her head, a tear slipping down her cheek unnoticed. For the first time, she believed him. Outside, the wind rose, carrying with it the distant howl of wolves. Jonas stood at the door, rifle resting against his shoulder, his silhouette cut sharp against the dying sun. Inside, Elena cradled Mateo close, whispering soft words in Apache, prayers, promises, or both. The fire glowed steady between them, fragile yet defiant, as if daring the darkness to try and smother it. Dawn bled across the ridges in pale streaks of pink and gray. The mountains seemed to hold their breath, snow crusted hard beneath the frost, every tree draped in silence. Then came the sound that did not belong, the slow crunch of hooves, the jingle of spurs, the murmur of men closing in. Jonas Hale stood outside his cabin, rifle clutched in calloused hands, his breath plumed white against the bitter morning air. Behind him, through the log walls, he could hear Elena humming to Mateo, low, steady, a song that sounded like a prayer. From the tree line, 5 riders emerged, coats dark, rifles across, their saddles eyes sharp and merciless, bounty hunters, wolves in human form. Their leader, a scarred man with a red bandana tied around his neck, raised his hand. We're looking for a woman, he called, voice rough. Apache blood in her veins. Carries a babe. Word is she's hidin' here. Jonas lifted his rifle slightly, not aiming yet. Ain't no woman here but the memory of my wife buried on this land. Best you turn around. Laughter cracked from one of the riders. You think we're blind? We tracked her print straight to your door. Inside, Elena stilled. She pressed Mateo tighter against her chest. The baby whimpered, his cry carrying faintly into the dawn. The bounty hunter's eyes sharpened at the sound. Negotiation shattered. Step aside, rancher, the scarred man demanded. Hand her over, and no harm will come to you. Jonas's voice rang cold across the snow. You'll get nothing here but lead. For a brief moment, silence hung like a drawn bowstring. Then a single gunshot cracked the morning. A bullet tore bark from the cabin's log wall inches from Jonas's head. Chaos exploded. Jonas dropped to one knee, sighted his rifle, and fired. One rider jerked back in the saddle, fell into the snow, blood blooming bright against white. The others dismounted, spreading wide, rifles barking in the frozen air. Inside the cabin, Elena laid Mateo in a wooden crate lined with furs, whispering, "Stay quiet, little one. Stay safe." Her hands shook only for a moment before she seized her bow and a long knife. She darted to the door, flinging it open just as Jonas reloaded. "Elena, stay back," Jonas shouted. "I will not hide while men come to kill my child," she snapped. Her voice was steel. Arrows hissed into the cold. One buried itself deep in a bounty hunter's thigh, sending him sprawling with a cry. Another grazed an arm, forcing a gun wide. The hunters regrouped, shouting curses, their boots crunching across the snow. Gunfire rattled like thunder. Jonas felt the slam of pain as a bullet tore through his shoulder, spinning him back against the cabin wall. His rifle dropped into the snow. Blood streamed hot against the frozen air. He staggered, gritting his teeth. Forcing himself upright, the scarred leader charged forward, revolver drawn. Jonas tried to raise his weaponless hand in defense, but Elena was faster. She lunged with her knife, driving it hard into the man's chest. His eyes went wide with shock before he collapsed into the snow, steam rising from his blood. Another hunter rushed her, grabbing her arm. She fought like fire, twisting, slashing, her dark braid whipping across her shoulder. Jonas, despite the agony in his wound, swung his rifle like a club, striking the man across the jaw. He went down hard, teeth scattering in the snow. The last hunter aimed at Elena, finger tightening on the trigger, but Jonas stepped into the line of fire, taking the shot into the already bleeding shoulder. He roared in pain, yet still drove forward, wrestling the gun away. Elena finished it, burying her blade deep into the man's throat. The snow was quiet again. Quiet but for ragged breaths, the crackle of the cabin fire and Mateo's wailing cry. 3 men lay sprawled across the mountain pass, blood soaking into the white drifts. 2 horses bolted down the slope, their riders gone to the grave. Jonas swayed, his vision blurred by blood loss. Elena rushed to his side, catching him before he fell. "You fool," she whispered fiercely, pressing her hand against his wound. "You would die for me?" Jonas's lips twisted in a grimace that was almost a smile. "Not for you alone. For him too. For what's right." She stared at him, her face torn between fury and something deeper. Slowly she pressed her forehead to his, her breath warm against his cheek. For a moment the battlefield faded. There was only the fire of their survival, the bond sealed in blood. They dragged the bodies away before nightfall, burying them shallow beneath the frozen earth. Elena moved like a woman possessed, her arms strong though her heart trembled. Jonas, weak but stubborn, helped as much as his battered body allowed. By the time the last mound was covered, the sun was sinking, staining the snow crimson and gold. Smoke curled from the cabin chimney, fragile against the vast sky. Elena stood beside Jonas, her hand steady on his uninjured arm. Together, they watched the wind scatter snow across the graves. "They'll send more," she murmured. Jonas nodded. "Then let them. This land is marked now, by blood, by choice. Whatever comes next, we face it together." The camera of the mind pulls wide, A lonely cabin scarred with bullet holes, smoke rising as dusk settles. The mountains tower dark, indifferent witnesses. Yet in the small glow of firelight, a woman, a man, and a child cling to life. Blood on the snow, love in the silence. The thaw came slowly, as if the mountains themselves were reluctant to surrender winter's grip. Snow melted into rivulets that carved silver threads down the slopes, and the air carried the first hints of grass and thawing earth. The cabin, scarred with bullet holes and patched with rough boards, stood stubbornly against the changing season. Inside, laughter broke the silence. Mateo's laughter, shrill and bright, like a bird testing its wings. Jonas, his shoulder still bound, but mending, sat by the hearth whittling a scrap of wood into a toy horse. Elena watched from the table, her hands busy mending a shirt, though her eyes lingered on him more often than the fabric. The house that had once been filled with nothing but echoes now held sound, fragile, human, alive. The wound had nearly taken him. For weeks fever rode him like a ghost, and Elena fought it with poultices and whispered prayers in Apache. She had stayed awake through long nights, her baby cradled in one arm while her other pressed cool cloths to Jonas's brow. When at last he woke fully, the first thing he saw was her face, worn, fierce and steady as stone. Now, as the days lengthened, strength returned to him in small measures. He chopped kindling again, though his movements were slower. He walked the slope above the cabin, rifle across his back, the snow crunching softer underfoot as it gave way to mud. He carried his scars with a kind of solemn acceptance. One morning, when the frost had retreated far enough to loosen the ground, Elena took a sack of seeds from the shelf. Corn, beans, and squash, gifts she had carried from her people, clutched even in flight. Jonas watched her step into the thawing field, the earth dark and wet beneath her boots. She crouched, pressing the kernels into the soil with hands that had once been only weapons, now sowing life. When she faltered, uncertain in the uneven ground, Jonas limped forward. He knelt beside her, his large hand steadying hers. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Not fire, not desperation, but the fragile weight of trust. "We plant," she whispered, voice low, "so we remember tomorrow still comes." Jonas nodded. "And because we've earned it." In the mining town below, whispers still circled of the half-breed woman and the rancher hiding her. Hunters might return, soldiers might march again, but here, high in the mountains, the world felt far away. At night, as the fire burned low, Elena sat close enough for Jonas to feel the warmth of her presence. He read aloud from his battered Bible, his voice rough but steady. She listened, eyes on the flames, sometimes smiling faintly when Mateo babbled in his sleep. Forbidden, yes. A woman marked as outlaw and a man scarred by war. But love does not heed the laws of towns or the judgments of men. It grows in the cracks where survival demands it. And in that cabin, beneath the shadow of the peaks, something undeniable had taken root. Spring sunlight poured across the valley the day Mateo took his first steps in the dirt yard. Elena's laughter rang free, clear as a stream, while Jonas's hand hovered near, ready to catch the child if he stumbled. Later, she returned to her garden plot, seeds tucked in her palm. She pressed them into the earth one by one, her braid brushing her shoulder, her lips moving in prayer. Jonas stood behind her, his hand covering hers as she lowered the last kernel. The earth closed over it, dark and rich. From blood and ashes, from hunger and fire, they had made a place where life might grow again. As the sun sank, painting the mountains in gold and shadow, the cabin glowed with firelight. Smoke curled into the evening air. Jonas leaned against the doorway, watching Elena hum to Mateo, her voice carrying softly over the land. The wind swept across the field, rustling the soil where seeds now slept. A promise of tomorrow. That was my story. If it reached you, tell me what you felt. Don't let silence bury us again. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and tell me where in the world you're listening from.